So welcome from my side to everyone joining today. What I would do is give you a brief introduction to ZALF and our working group, so you also maybe know where I come from, and also maybe for our later talks it can be interesting, and then give you an introduction to the concept that is underlying the research and also has informed, of course, much of the work that we did on integrating the peacebuilding indicators into impact assessment. So as for ZALF, I don't know if some of you worked with ZALF before, know it or not, but we are an agriculture research institute, and thus we are very much interested in delivering solutions for an economically, environmentally, and socially sustainable agriculture, and this together with the society. And hereby we try to apply a lot of transdisciplinary research, but also, of course, put this emphasis very much also on the question of transfer and dialogue with a society. Just as a brief, we are just below 400 employees, and we are based about 40-50 kilometers east of Berlin in Brandenburg, and ZALF had a campus, but also own experimental sites. And here we very much focus on the analysis of land use and governance in emerging and developing countries. And we focus very much with our research on questions regarding the avoidance of land use, the improved adaptation to climate change, also food and nutrition security, and the stabilization of livelihoods of smallholders. And we are quite an interdisciplinary team, I would say, and thus with inter and transdisciplinary approaches, we aim to find strategies that help to mitigate complex problems of farming systems at the local, regional, and the global scale. And in our projects, we have more emphasis on the local and regional scale, but of course, always also have to link also to the global context. Just so that you see where we are having current cooperations and partnerships going on, it's in Sub-Saharan Africa, where my personal research focus is on, but also on Latin America and Asia. And this work that I'm presenting today is also linked to a project that we're still conducting on Colombia. So it's linked to Latin American research group. Within the SUSLAND group, I'm one of those that brings in always this question on the social dimensions that impact on land use questions. And therefore also my personal focus is on this nexus, as I said before. And in my research, I try or want to reveal underlying aspects of natural resource management. It can be, for example, biodiversity conservation or restoration activities. So therefore, maybe for discussions or also later networking, maybe the question is very much how do the social and the ecological dimension interlink in the context of natural resource management? How do natural resource management approaches and practices impact on societal relations? And how can also maybe agriculture interventions be set up in a way that they positively or actively contribute also to social cohesion? And here also to look at differences. Is there a difference between top-down and bottom-up approaches on how this relates then to societal dynamics? And what are context-specific factors, but what are maybe also factors that are more generalizable, so that this can also be taken in consideration when planning interventions. So the underlying work hypothesis that I have in my work is that natural resource management activities, they have a significant or they have an influence on social cohesion, and that different approaches and practices also have different impacts. And in order to understand this better, I aim to explore this causal relation, not only in like a one-directional analysis, but also more with causal loops to also see interlinkages and causal relations. And of course, to assess the impacts on social cohesion, we also require indicators that help us actually measure it. So this is also why this work that I'll be presenting afterwards is happening. And then this can then help us to evaluate the different natural resource management approaches. Why the focus on social cohesion? I think many of us know that social cohesion can act as a so-called societal glue and has a very central role for societal well-being and also the long-term success of development. And it's a very long-standing concept which has been frequently used in multiple disciplines, particularly in the social and political science. And there's very many definitions. So some focus more on different components, including the social integration, solidarity, equity, place attachment, or also identity. But what is kind of common in the definitions that it's always attributable to a collective, which can be a community, also a neighborhood, a region, or even a society as a whole. So there again, we have the different scales on which we can look at for social cohesion. So when looking at social cohesion, it's very much a reflection on the level of interconnectedness, trust, and reciprocity within a society, and also how social groups maybe perform norms, code of conduct, convention, and habits. And it's these institutions, which can be formal or informal, which are central to maintaining the societal trust and performance. And very often there's a focus more on the formal institutions, and the study or also the recognition of these informal institutions often very much still underappreciated. However, it's argued that it's very important to have the cohesion for mutually beneficial trading arrangement, and also to have societies agree kind of also on the management, on governance, for example, of collective goods. And in my research, I very much thus use social cohesion as a proxy for peace building. When we talk about cohesion, it's important there can be the cohesion on kind of two levels. The one is the horizontal cohesion, which is between members of society. So it's possible that it's among individuals within the same group, but also among individuals across different groups. And then there's the vertical cohesion, which is more between members of the state and society. And for my impact, this is very crucial to look at this both levels, because it's possible that maybe cohesion on the vertical level is maybe rather low, but maybe on a horizontal level, there is much stronger cohesion, and maybe this helps then also to balance or to account for some services that maybe on the vertical levels are missing. And improving both horizontal and vertical is a crucial factor, is the argument for fostering development, including the success of agriculture interventions. Whilst cohesion is on the one hand side considered as very important for development, there's also research on the other way around. So that also, of course, for natural resource management, there can be impact on social cohesion. I get an update, I hope it's not here. And hereby the argument is that by appropriate governance approaches or also practices in a given community, joint natural resource management or resource management can actually provide space that then fosters community cohesion, and also gives space to create levels of trust, interaction, and collaboration. And so when we think of a nexus of natural resource management, social cohesion, and peace buildings, as I said, our perspective, a reciprocal relationship, and social cohesion is a prerequisite for natural resource management. And at the same time, natural resource management can also become an entry point for contributing or strengthening social cohesion. So while this interrelation is kind of there, and especially on this level of the importance of cohesion for development, but also more and more through the rise of the environmental peace building debates, and also on the other relationship, there is much acknowledgement. There is still a lot of lack of knowledge and research on underlying mechanisms on how to actually impact on it and how they impact both directions. So therefore, there is this need for more understanding to help also thereby plan better and more context-specific interventions for the different contexts. However, while social cohesion is acknowledged as crucial for sustainable peace and development, and also agriculture, especially in post-war environments, is very fundamental to contribute to economic, social, and environmental development, in practice, it is often the case that social cohesion as peace building is not an explicit objective of agriculture interventions, the focus is more on improving the agriculture production system or creating income, which is of course key to also cohesion development, but peace building is often a very assumed byproduct rather than an active goal of the interventions. So to create or foster the creation of social cohesion in the context of natural resource management, we need to put more emphasis also on societal processes when planning interventions. If we do not do this, then interventions can also have negative impacts or unintended consequences by, for example, depoliticizing, for example, a context, or also contributing actually to higher risk if, for example, conflicting expectations are not taken into account, or certain groups are only heard and not integrated, or also if inappropriate governance mechanisms maybe undermine eventually cohesion. To prevent this, there is need for more monitoring and also impact assessment, or at least it's one approach that can help to create these better fit interventions. And this is where sustainability impact assessment comes in as one possible tool that can help contribute to the positive interlinkage. And as for impact assessment, it's a process that identifies basically future consequences of an intended action. And there is theory and practice growing a lot on impact assessment at all. And there is impact assessment approaches that have a strong focus on the economic only, on the environmental only, or on the social only, as for example, there's different levels that they target, local, national, or regional, for example, also different targets as for policies or programs, projects, and then also at the timing of which it is actually conducted. Is it ex ante, i.e. before the actual intervention, during, or ex post, so afterwards? And on the project level, there's the research that there is more ex post impact assessment than ex ante. So more on the actual achievements than on reflecting prior to the intervention on what are potential or possible impacts when putting the planned objective in place. A more recent approach is sustainability impact assessment, where there is the key focus actually on assessing or paying attention through all the three dimensions of sustainability, and to look at them not only in parallel, but also to consider the interlinkages of the different dimensions. Also in sustainability impact assessment, a key element is the involvement of stakeholders. So it's less about looking at documents and maybe from an expert level view to assess the intervention, but to have stakeholders involved at multiple steps from the beginning onwards to help assess the planned project or program. And thereby a strong element of sustainability impact assessment is also on creating kind of a space for learning, for reflection and exchange. This is just a brief view of the different types of impact assessments. So moving more from those more parallel impact assessment tools to the one where in sustainability you have this overlap and interrelation. And whilst many sustainability impact approaches exist, so far we found that none explicitly integrates peace building in its concept. But as said, we consider this as important because of otherwise the potential of unintended or negative consequences. So I think this is already said. Having this in mind, it's important that here in our work, or in my work, I apply the concept of positive peace, which means that it's not only an absence of violence, where we look at numbers of deaths, for example, but it's also very much about the ability of a society to also absorb shocks without falling or relapsing into conflict, and to make capacity building and agency and social cohesion a crucial pillar of peace building. And thus also here the peace building definition integrates a range of measures targeted to reduce this risk of or relapse into conflict by strengthening different capacities at different levels for conflict management, and to then lay the foundation for peace and development. Having this framework in mind and also the different concepts that are underlying, we started in a project team to design and develop peace building indicators for integration in sustainability impact assessment. And this research was done in our team related to a still ongoing project on sustainable land use systems. It's a ZALF project on implementing sustainable agriculture and livestock systems for simultaneously targeting forest conservation, for climate change mitigation and peace building. And it's led by CIAT, or now the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT, in collaboration with ZALF, Thünen Institute and CPAF. It started in 2019 and was now extended for another year. And it has a focus on cocoa agroforestry systems and silvopastoral systems. And I won't go much into detail here, but we were looking more in the end peace building component and to help us actually assess within the project, but then of course also later at other scales, what are possible impacts of those land use systems in the project on peace building. We needed to find indicators that actually can help us also assess the impacts. To do this, we had like a 3-step approach. So we looked on the one hand side, following very standardized literature review, to look at the linkages between the peace building and development of existing frameworks on measuring, and also on existing frameworks that exist for measuring peace building. And here we looked on the one hand side on the Scopus and Google Scholar for scientific publications, but also of course integrated gray literature from agencies and different organizations working on peace building. We came up with about a total of 300 publications and then narrowed it down through a first analysis of title and abstracts to 110, which we could then analyze using MaxQDA content analysis, which helped us to kind of systematically analyze it, create then key codes and also subcodes for the development of components that are based on literature important for peace building and that can help us thereby to create the peace building indicators. What we did in parallel was also an assessment of existing sustainability impact assessment tools in order to check from those indicators that we consider should be important or components for assessment of peace buildings, what is actually already present or existent in existing sustainability impact assessment tools. And here it's important to note that we put focus on those tools that focus on assessment of agricultural or farming interventions. And then we went through those to check what are indicators that are in and to what extent do they relate to the concept of peace building. And then in the second or third step, we then applied expert interviews in order to pilot and also refine indicators. And this was then in the frame of the ZALF project, where we did 10 individual interviews and a focus group discussion with different actors. And we did it by integrating the new indicators in an existing impact assessment tool. So we did the impact assessment activity and had then the components of the peace building potential assessment integrated. So our review came up that first for the peace building, there is the 4 components basically, which we could use as overall key components, which is the social cohesion, then agents, which relates to inclusivity and level of participation, then capacity building negotiation capabilities, and reparations, which is linked to transitional justice questions. And now it's so small, I hope you can read anything here. I won't go through all the indicator in detail, but just to give you some example, for the social cohesion then a subcategories or indicators to operationalize it asks, for example, then in the impact assessment, if the project promotes trust building between citizens in the state. So this is the vertical I was referring to earlier. Or if the project recognizes informal institutions and local organizational forms, which is more on the horizontal cohesion level, as for an example. And then for agency, which is on this inclusivity, let's say, it's on asking if it integrates conflicting parties, if it integrates victim of violence, and also recognizing existing social leaders as actors in the processes. For the negotiation and capacity management, it asks, for example, if the project provides dialogue spaces, to contribute to dialogue between conflicting parties, if it promotes different negotiation and mediation capacities, and also if it builds capacity to be politically active, so empowering. And with regards to the reparation, it asks, for example, if the project contributes to victim compensation, to land restitution, and also to repairing environmental damage that was caused by a conflict. So this is in total 17 indicators under these 4 key components that we filtered through the research. And we were also backed up in our findings or in the derival of the indicators by kind of parallel research that happened by Morales Munoz et al., where also in the frame of the SLUS project, the stakeholders that were part in it were actually asked to prioritize different peace building dimensions. And I'm just showing this because on the one hand side is more or less overlapping categories, even though we have different terminology here and there, but it shows the importance of having actually different actors involved in the planning and then later also implementation, because it's interesting that the practitioners, so those more of the project partners who were involved on the implementation level, they had a key focus on the socioeconomic inclusion, whilst the local stakeholders, they had also a key focus on this capacity building relating to peace culture, negotiation management, and also to governance, inclusive governance of the interventions. So therefore, it's important, as I said, to have these different actors involved, as it's also an integral part of sustainability impact assessment, but of course also to allow enough time thereby for the conceptualization and planning of interventions. This, as I said, we matched with looking at existing impact assessment methods. And there is multiple tools for impact assessment that exist. And of course, they have also indicators inherent that are crucial to peace building. However, they very much focus more on assessment of socioeconomic improvements. So does a project, for example, contribute to an increase of net income, for example? But they don't have an explicit focus on peace building and on components such as agency and capacity building for negotiation and conflict management. And these were components, as shown before, that were very relevant to stakeholders that we work with. So to test it, we tested it in the frame of an existing tool, which is called Scala. It fulfills the definitions I told you earlier, that it looks at the different dimensions and the interrelations. And we picked it also because it's a tool that was actually derived from practice by kind of the assessment of nearly 40 different agriculture projects in developing countries in order to filter out so-called successment factors of sustainable development projects. So Scala itself assumes that in order that each project intends to foster a wider adoption needs to fulfill certain preconditions for its applicability. And these preconditions relate to financial, human resource, institutional, and infrastructure factors. And it's a very standardized tool. I will show it to you in a second. But then requirements are then linked to associated set of factors that determine the success. And then later you can also play around with potential for scaling up. This makes it maybe a little bit more explicit. So the Scala tool consisted of 8 with our integrated component of peace building, now 9 different steps. And each step has a different focus for evaluation. So in the first step, there's different indicators that you are asked to look at how far it is more with regards to overall sustainability. But then there's different indicators that asked on adaptive capacity assessment, adjustment strategy, etc. And in the last two steps, you can then weigh your context specificity with regards to a number of factors and then score 1 to 3 to also see to what is a potential outscaling potential of the project. And what we did is we created this step 6 with the indicators I just showed to you, and then the participants would be asked, does the project promote political participation? Yes, no. Does it promote trust building? Yes, no. And then depending on the amount of yeses, here the tool, this is like the structure that was preset in the Scala, so we just adjusted it for the peace building context here also, then rates if there's a low, a medium, or high peace building potential. This relates only to those 4 components that we developed. However, as I said, of course, in impact assessment, there's already a number of other indicators that are very relevant for peace building to enhance socioeconomic development. And thereby we also linked indicators in the overall tool to the principles for designing peace building interventions. And then here happens a cross calculation in the tool itself between different steps. So if you look at the Scala tool, then you would always find a high number throughout all the different steps. And this is then calculated towards overall peace building potential relating to these principles. You can look at the tool itself. It's available as an app for Android phones, but we also have offline versions if you go to the field and want to apply it. And we would be very interested then, of course, also to get your feedback on its usage, etc. From our first assessments, we found that the indicators that we developed as for the 17 for the use and practice is quite useful. But of course, there is also room for improvement. And this was, for example, relating to 2 indicators the case. The one is on if a project contributes to generating historical awareness of violence, and also if it promotes protection mechanisms against violent threat. These were 2 indicators which were very difficult to directly connect to a planned intervention here relating to the sustainable end to systems. So of course, participants reflected a lot, but they were not able to make a direct correlation, of course, on the potential. So therefore, the first, for example, was taken out of an initial lift that we had. And on the second one, we are still kind of assessing through more impact assessment to what extent this is useful or not. To come to an end, some limitations and a conclusion. So overall, not only for the peace building potential assessment, but overall, one has to consider that it's an ex ante impact assessment. So it actually happens before the intervention. So it's all very much based on indirect evaluations and assumptions. And thereby there's always the risk that the potential is overestimated by stakeholders. And of course, there can also be kind of a response bias if certain stakeholders are interested in getting a certain intervention or whatsoever. Also, sustainability impact assessment is, of course, very context specific. And so one cannot just transfer one assessment from maybe one context to the other, but needs to really look if this is transferable or what is the context there. As it is always on a potential impact, one has to really make sure that in the implementation process, the project meets the intended outcomes. And so there's a continuous need also for ongoing monitoring and then later also evaluation. Also, we think it's important to always couple sustainability impact assessment with other methods to also know more about the context, for example, by an assessment of local and regional development plans. and also to check what are actually also priorities of public institutions of conflict transformation. To sum up, as I said, consider it crucial to have societal processes integrated or actively integrated in the planning of development interventions, because just because there's so-called absence of violence does not necessarily create or stabilize peace. If we ignore it, interventions themselves can have also negative, unintended negative effects. And for measuring actually also the social dimensions on development and also to include more spaces, etc., this needs to be more proactively promoted. And as I said, sustainability impact assessment can be one tool, but of course, there's also other approaches. Overall, we require still much more research also on this nexus in both dimensions. And I think it's, therefore great if more of us do research or joint research also on the socio-ecological consequences of natural resource management and how it's interlinked, especially in conflict-affected settings. And with this, I close. I thank you